Hi everyone, Zeina and Teresa with us. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Carla Ail. I'm the assistant to the director at the Asfari Institute for Civil Society and Citizenship. And this is the second webinar in our series of webinars on care. And today we'll be discussing the ways in which we can overcome the challenges of the Kafala system in Lebanon. We have very esteemed guests with us today. We will begin with Zeina Mezher from the ILO, International Labour Organization. And Zeina will be introducing us to the Kafala system, as well as what could be done to make decent work a reality for migrant domestic workers and care workers. And then we will move to Teresa Pontillas, who is the co-founder of the Alliance for Domestic Workers, and who will be sharing with us actually the lived experiences of migrant domestic workers in Lebanon. Zeina, do you want to take the floor?
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. I need just 1 minute to put my screen, and we'll be with you. Here we go. Okay. So can you see it clearly and you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Yes, I'm really happy to be here, although sometimes for us working in this field of promoting the rights of migrant domestic workers or care workers, kafala sounds like, a buzzword. It's always there. And everybody wants to talk about it, want to do something about it. So let's dive in today through the time we have together to just reconsider really what is kafala and could be done. This might be a bit repetitive for activists who work on this, but again, it's very important to put the whole issue in context. So if we go beyond Lebanon, if we look at migration itself, we know that it is a global phenomenon, and many people migrate because they have dreams, they want to make a better life, right? But unfortunately, it's not the case every time. It's not always that people have a choice to migrate. There are push factors for migration, and often people migrate because of economic reasons, wars, personal circumstances that often include gender-based violence. And this is also something from a gender lens that require a lot of attention and consideration, not only to understand it as a push factor, but also see, like in Lebanon, we are a destination country, what kind of support we can also provide to migrant workers who not only might be subject to gender-based violence here in the destination country, but this might be a factor why they don't want to go back, why they are stuck in an abusive relationship, but still they don't want to go back. So this is an important lens that I invite you to reflect on. In 2021, ILO and UNICEF conducted global estimates to understand also the phenomena of migration in relation to numbers and trends. And it's really striking to see that there are 50 million people in situation of modern slavery. So this is a big number, right? Where people are really now in this time still are facing forced labor and very abusive working relationship. But this also covers child labor, and child labor also covers child marriages. So when especially girls are pushed into marriages. So I think AUB Asfari Institute is going to share this presentation with you. So whenever you see something in blue, there's a link that you can connect and you can go and read more about the sources of this information. Important also to know that migration is, to a large extent, it's related to the world of work. And why that's important is because it helps us really map the stakeholders who needs to be involved in this, right? So it's really the actors in the economy, ministries of labor, workers. When we talk about workers in ILO language, we say workers as organized workers, as unions. And we're gonna talk a bit about this for domestic workers, and I'm glad that Teresa is going to follow after me, and she is one of the great representatives. But there is also kind of challenges for workers, especially migrant workers or domestic workers, to organize in Lebanon, and that's why this is important to keep in mind. We also, it's also about employers, and again, for domestic workers, it's often individual employers, but in the ILO language, when we talk about employers, it's about like associations of employers, because these are the ones, trade unions and association of employers are the ones who negotiate with the government on better policies and implement law enforcement, etc. And for domestic workers, this is quite complicated because they are not like, they're not a formal sector, and it's very unique who the employers are and how divided they are. But the migration, because it's also part of the world of work, it also means that migrant workers have great contribution to economic growth. And this is, again, one more reason why they should be clearly rewarded not only with decent living wages, but also with benefits and with respect, the respect that they should have as equal workers like all other workers. Now, what I just mentioned is really not exclusive to Lebanon or the region. It's global. But in countries where labor migration policies are weak, such as in Lebanon and the region, the gender dimension to domestic work adds to the vulnerability. And when I say domestic work and care work, you will hear me often navigating between the two terms, because care work represents, and here we're talking about paid care workers. Care workers can be in institutions such as childcare institutions, or in hospitals, or in cares for older persons, institutions for people with disabilities. Domestic work are those who provide services in the house. It can be to take care of a child or an older person, but it can also mean cleaning, gardening, drivers, etc. So in these countries, the gender lens is very important also to keep in mind, because it adds to the vulnerability. And we will look at these vulnerabilities while trying to understand kafala, why kafala is something very important to try to decipher and see where are the entry points to change this exploitative system that has been recognized not only by the media, but also through ILO committee of experts that looks at countries' commitments to international labor standards. It was recognized that there is a forced labor element in the way Lebanon deals with migrant domestic workers. And this is serious, because then it puts Lebanon under certain obligations, because Lebanon is a member state of the ILO. And also we can talk about this more during the Q&A later on. So the kafala is not really one law. It's not like something that you can decide to change, where you would go to the parliament and propose. It's not like that, because it is it's intertwined regulations and ministerial memos and practices that are all mixed together. It's a form of labor governance that makes it very complicated. And I'm going to show you just very quickly why. There are 5 core elements in the relationship between an employer and a migrant worker that may impede internal labor mobility. Why internal labor mobility is very important? Because this is where the worker has a choice to be in a working relationship or to resign. We can resign either because we're not happy in our job, or because we have personal circumstances and we need to go back to our country, or it can be simply because we got a better job offer. Isn't this the case for everyone here? It should be, right? But for migrant workers, because of kafala, it's not. So the labor mobility is at the heart of what makes kafala in the region a very complicated system, because sponsorship in general, it becomes more and more like the migration system that governs employment relationship worldwide. It is problematic if you ask these questions and you respond yes to one of them. So let's go through them. Is entry into the country tied to a specific employer through a work and or residency permit visa? Yes. What follows here, which I didn't include here, is if these workers, these sectors are covered by labor law, covered by certain protection that protect them from abuse. And in the case of Lebanon, it's no. Then we go, is renewal of stay in the country the responsibility of the employer? So who should apply to renew the work permit? Who should apply to renew the residency? Is it the worker or the employer? Does termination of employer request approval of the employer? And does changing from one employer to another involve the first employer and is subject to the first employer? Does exit from the country require approval of the employer? In Lebanon, the first 4 questions we respond to with this. The last one changed like 10 years ago. Before, the migrant worker, if they need to go back to travel even on a short visit, they needed an approval from the employer to show at the airport. Luckily, that was revoked, it changed, but that's the only thing that has developed. All of the previous questions remain that the domestic worker, migrant domestic worker, is tied very much to one employer with a lot of power, not only on the work relationship, but even on a personal life of the migrant domestic worker, which makes kafala even more complicated. And why this is complicated, if we zoom in when we talk about so what, even if the employer has control? Because not always employers have the, first of all, the good intention of respecting the full rights of the worker. What are these full rights? If we look at it from a work's perspective, it means fair wage, paid at the end of the month without any deduction. It means access to healthcare. It means rest during working hours. It means proper, if it's a live-in situation, it means proper room, light, with privacy, where the worker can feel secure and can have a key to lock the room and to keep their savings. It means the ability to communicate with friends and family. And it means also the ability to decide, to choose. I mean, these are workers, right? They are responsible, they are adult, they are leading their own life. So to a great extent, because of kafala practices and the stereotypes around this relationship, often employers abuse this power and restrict the freedom and choices of migrant workers. And there are studies that also, I'm sure you're aware of most of them, that link this to evidence. And therefore, it becomes very important to look at the life of migrant domestic workers, not only through the employment lens, but also how could this be affecting the individual level? Why migrant workers, for example, who come usually during the peak fertility years have no right to have a life, to get pregnant, to form a family when they are working? Why is this? Why are these two contradictory? Why aren't they linked to a social protection system where the maternity protection is not a burden on the employer, but it's the state that's taking care of it? These are questions that usually we don't ask them because we are still looking at the very basic minimum protection, which is wage, paid at the end of the month. Don't force them to stay in the house, don't force them to work, and allow them to organize. But there are many elements that are, in our view, and I'm sure many of you would agree, are basic rights as well, that we're still not really advocating for because of how complicated the kafala system is making the life of migrant domestic workers in Lebanon. So what I will share now is what can we do about it? And again, this might seem repetitive, but again, I think in the spirit of this seminar also, and the series of the seminar, it's also how can activists and academia try to build their strategies in order for this system that is like a web of different regulations and practices, how could it be dismantled, right? So these are entry points. Let's reflect on them one by one. Again, first of all, the amendment of the labor law. It's a famous mantra, right? How can we support workers if they are still informal? So the amendment of the labor law, by removing the exception of Article 7, which excludes domestic workers from the labor law, and here, mind you, it excludes nationals and migrants. So it's not only migrants that could be affected, it's also nationals. And the alternative is not only to amend the labor law, but also draft supplementary law, because there is something very specific about domestic work, about the isolation, you know, behind closed doors, where family and personal issues also is intersecting with work relations. So there are very specific things about this sector that requires more attention that could be simply mentioned in the labor law. But whatever supplementary law should be to the labor law. So it's very important not to separate the two, not to create just a standalone law. And you know why? Because these are workers. And the first recognition that they are workers, that they should be covered by the same law that covers all other workers. So first we should amend the labor law and then make sure that there is a supplementary law. And all of this should be guided by Convention 189, which was adopted by members by ILO during the International Labour Conference attended by all member states of the ILO in 2011. And here in the link, whoever is curious to see how the promotion of rights and the achievement regarding rights of domestic workers, what's the progress around that 10 years after the adoption of the convention, you can click on this link and you will have a lot of material to go through that also shows you a bit of comparison, you know, between different countries. So this is a very interesting document that I invite you to read. Number two is to advocate for the adoption of the improved standard unified contract. Many of you might have known about the standard unified contract, which was almost adopted by the Ministry of Labor in 2020. It was very much developed in alignment with Convention 189 and in alignment with the national law. And unfortunately, because of a complaint by the recruitment agencies, it was put on hold. Now, if you look at the text that I'm showing you in front of me, there's two notions that are very important here. If you are advocating for the standard unified contract, it's important to make sure it's the improved version that is aligned with C189. Why? Because there is a risk that the government might decide to adopt a new standard unified contract, but that does not have, that is not adhering with international standards, which means it would be a step backward. Why? Because we will see that, oh, great, we have, you know, we achieved some amendments, but if these amendments do not secure the rights of the workers, then it is still problematic. So this is why the nuance of the advocacy is also important. Then comes an important element, which is about amending recruitment regulations and moderation, and address the high cost of recruitment. Often employers use the recruitment cost as an excuse for violating the rights of the workers. But again, to be fair to employers and workers, the recruitment cost is very high, and it shouldn't be as high. There should be very clear cost breakdown, and this should be tied to also the ability of workers, to the right of workers to mobility, but also this should not be a burden on the employer. So for this to become more manageable, we need to relook at the recruitment regulation and the cost breakdown and what defines the cost of recruitment. And the ILO has developed tools that direct towards that, and I put them here in the link. More importantly, when we talk about recruitment regulation, it doesn't only concern recruitment regulation at country of destination, but also in country of origin. Because also migration is a link between country of origin and country of destination. So we should go beyond what is happening in destination. And the message that we promote at country of origin is don't promote recruitment unless it's to decent work. So if recruitment is promoted just, in an abstract way, let's help people move and leave the country. It might be we're facilitating for them in a way. So it's very important to look at the country of origin, what they are doing, how it links to destination, and keep looking at that circle of migration. Even in best case scenarios, workers always need accessible complaint mechanism, and we need to have law enforcement in place. Here, unfortunately, for workers, it's more about the worst case scenario, because we have very weak complaint mechanism, we have very weak access to justice, and there is no proper law enforcement. So the recommendation is to strengthen the complaint and enforcement mechanism, and also strengthen the referral of services. Many NGOs are very active and very good, but it's still very tiny to be able to assist someone. And last time I was at Asfari, an Asfari event, Teresa spoke about a case which she was assisting and helping. I personally tried to connect with Teresa and the people who were helping worker, and it was very complicated. I mean, things were in the right direction, but it's very timely. And sometimes the worker does not afford to wait that long to be saved from a certain situation. So this is something that's important also to look at. And support the right of care workers and migrant domestic workers to organize and on collective bargaining. Because no matter how strong and vocal organizations are, it's very important to keep the agents with the migrant domestic workers, with the care workers, because they know better. They know what they are facing, they know what they want. So through organizing, it's formalizing this right that they are here as and have equal voice in the policies and implementation mechanisms that affect them. Again, in Lebanon, the practice used to be before the crisis that it's live-in full-time domestic work. It's changing slowly, but this is still not recognized. So this is also very important to propose modality that enables part-time domestic work. This is very hard under the current sponsorship system, because you have one sponsor who paid for the recruitment cost, and the and Ministry of Labor expect that the worker works only with this sponsor. So the part-time modality, even if it is a need for employers, they cannot get it today legally in the country. So we have to reflect and propose recruitment modalities on that. But very important to make sure that these recruitment modalities are fair to workers. For example, in some of the countries in the region, they tested on recruitment modalities where a cleaning company is the sponsor, and the cleaning company allowed the worker to work part-time in different households. I mean, when an informal assessment was done on these modalities, it turned out that they are even more abusive than if it's an employer in a household. So it's very important to look at what are the modalities and how beneficial and protective it is to the workers, and how fair is it to the employer, because not all employers are bad employers, and the system has to cater in a fair way for both. Establish a wage protection mechanism. I know that in Lebanon, some people might laugh at this and they would say, yeah, but we also need a protection mechanism for our wages, for our money, given the devaluation of the lira. That does not mean that the migrant workers who leave their families behind to come and work in a country don't have a basic right to have a proper wage and a wage protection mechanism very clear and accessible to them. Assess access to healthcare. We know that there is a prerequisite on an insurance that is there, and it's without it you can't obtain a work permit. However, we know also it falls short from international standards and from really protecting workers. Very important to work on a proposal where there's comprehensive coverage, including mental health, including dental care and eye care, and ideally maternity protection and access also to reproductive health protection. Expand social protection to include migrant domestic workers, address detention of migrant workers and what's happening in detention centers, and especially administrative detention. promote skills and skills recognition in the care sector. You need the worker to be motivated to acquire more skills, but you need those skills offering to be there. We are currently conducting a comprehensive mapping to know what are the organizations that provide skills and capacity building to care workers, and we're assessing the material, the type of material, comparing to international practices. And hopefully we are moving in this direction where we are going to be promoting more and more skills and skills recognition. To be able to do that, we are also going to organize focus group with workers and employers to see what is the, from the workers' point of view, what are the skills that they would require, but also from the employer's point of view, what is the incentive for them to give more benefits if the worker is skilled, and to look also at the skills need from the employers and the service receiver side. So this is a research, whoever is interested in also, you can know, and I'll share with you the report when it's done, or invite you to the event where we're going to discuss it. And last point on what can be done is also to benefit from what's happening globally with the innovation of care cooperatives, because care cooperatives is also an alternative way to organizing where workers are themselves the agents that determine the working conditions in providing the services. And it's a very empowering experience. We're also working on a research on this and hopefully practically on supporting care cooperatives. And again, I'll be happy to share more in due time about this. Now, in relation to care, because those ideas are linked to kafala, are linked to the vulnerabilities of migrant workers, their needs, what can we do? But in relation to care, it's very important to make sure that the approach to care in Lebanon is really aligned with the transformative action in the policy areas of care, which is emphasized in the 5R framework for decent care workers. And that looks not only at paid care workers, but also look at the role that often play and invites to reduce the burden of care and redistribute it within the family. So also it increases women's participation in the economy. It contributes to a more healthy balance in life, and also to recognize what it is, to recognize its value. And then the 5R also look at paid care work, and here it calls for representation and reward for care workers, and it goes into details. So I'm sure, I mean, most of you are familiar with this, but it's very important whatever plans is moving forward is also kind of coordinated within this approach, so we are all complementary. And very important while promoting care work and professionalization in the care sector, not to unintentionally create unnecessary fragmentation and hierarchy in relation to migrant workers, where it becomes, you know, like migrant domestic workers at the very bottom of the ladder, because we are professionalizing the care sector. So this is really an important nuance to keep in mind, because the whole idea is to promote equality, is to promote decent work for all, and not for one group within a sector on the expense of the other. Now, how to do that is, again, through dialogue, through solidarity, through understanding the need of every group and what could be done to change the situation. And to also recall, and this was kind of going back to the introduction, that kafala is an intertwined puzzle, and it would need solidarity, it would need collective effort. It takes a lot of time, because it's, whenever you're working with policymakers, you have to start from a certain place. And with the turmoil in Lebanon, with the change of government that is continuous, it's often going back to square in mobilizing efforts to change something around migrant workers' rights and kafala. So it does take time, but it's very important comprehensive system that values migrant domestic workers and recognize their contributions. And that's from my side. I have a bit of a shaky internet. I hope you were able to hear me. And I'd rather give a bit of time to also questions and discussions, and here, Teresa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zeina. It was perfect. We heard you very clearly, and thank you for the comprehensive presentation. I would like to give the floor to Teresa, because Zeina, as you said, it would need dialogue and it would need solidarity. So I want to ask Teresa more about to introduce us to the Alliance for Domestic Workers, what it is that you do, and the challenges that you have been facing in your attempts to organize and support the migrant domestic workers, given the gender implications of this system that Zeina just talked to us about.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and inviting me again. Good day, everyone. My name is Teresa Pontillas. I am from the Philippines, a migrant worker and a co-founder of the Alliance of Migrant Domestic Workers in Lebanon. The Alliance is a non-formal organization founded in 2016 by largely women of diverse nationality, advocating for equal rights and protection. As workers, our organization seeks to empower our co-workers by educating them about their rights in Lebanon and providing them about and providing sorry and providing them with series of programs such as soap and jam making as an alternative livelihood. On behalf of all women migrant workers, I appear before you today to discuss our experiences under the Kafala System, a sponsorship system that fosters contemporary slavery by cultivating a sponsor worker power imbalance and a sponsor legal impunity among domestic workers. Under Kafala, a non-national's immigration status and legal presence in a host country are linked to an individual sponsor during the duration of the contract. The sponsor has complete control over our visas, work transfers, and even our entire exit from the host nation. As a result, we are subject to labor exploitation and harsh treatment because only our sponsors have the authority to extend or revoke our visas. Some of the struggles experienced under Kafala are restriction of movement and communication because some employers confiscate passports and phones which cut communications from their loved ones. Second, workers are subject to forced labor due to contract sub substitution, a common tactic in which workers accept poor wages and sign multiple contracts in which they don't fully understand. Lastly, irregular residence status is common because workers are fully dependent on sponsors to remain in the country legally. With my years of working here, I am a living testament, as well as my fellow workers, on how heavy the burdens of the kafala system been brought to our shoulders. Just like the story of a fellow worker that Zeina just mentioned, my employer saved her from her last employer that she was locked up, and 1 year and 2 months that they didn't do her legal papers. And when this coworker was rescued, she stayed here, and she was mentally and physically damaged because of the employers that employer threatened her. So during her stay, she recovered. She stayed here for almost 3 weeks, and now she had an employer, and still not sure about her case because her employer is not cooperating with her release paper. So that's why she was moving to employer to another employer. One employer, she was working 3 years and a half without doing her legal papers also. So she went back to the agency, and the agency make money out of her, putting in another employer which didn't do again her papers for a year and 2 months. So it's not her fault. It's between the agency and her employers that who didn't did her papers. So now that she's in a new employer, she had a lawyer from NRC, as Zeina mentioned, that it will take for a while to really the case will be approved or whatever they will do to be in order to be legal, that she will be legal. To conclude, migrant domestic workers are one of Lebanon's most vulnerable communities. We have long suffered from this abusive kafala system, and so our call is to dismantle and fully abolish the system that trapped us in an environment of domestic violence and discrimination. We proposed an open labor market that will allow us freely change employers or join a union without negative consequences, just like any other workers. We demand for inclusivity in labor law that will protect our rights to a healthy and safe working and living environment. We strongly urge Lebanon to uphold its national duties and treat workers in conformity with international human rights law. We hope for the adoption and full implementation of the new standard unified contract, which will combat the situation that lead to forced labor servitude. Ultimately, workers' organizations are crucial in information dissemination about migrant workers' rights, and it is our hope that our aspirations to combat the aspirations for strengthened legal protection and combating rampant abuse will be materialized in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I have a question. It's a bit related to your work as an alliance. How do you manage to find solidarity amongst each other amidst these very difficult circumstances? And considering that some of you come from different countries and you speak different languages, how are you able to bridge and like to meet and to kind of have this kind of solidarity amidst these very difficult circumstances?
Yeah, for us as diverse nationality, we manage for that, and because we have also a French speaker and an Arabic speaker, so in English, so we help each other in order to have no problems with the language barrier. So this is how we are all, and also we collaborate with other migrant domestic workers who, with us. There are others also informal organizations like us. So we collaborate with them. We are not working on this by alone by the alliance.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I'm going to give the floor to questions. So if any of the attendees or participants would like to ask, please go ahead and send your questions via the Q&A. I think there's a question for Zeina in the Q&A. How can we implement this into an NGO project that promotes and advocates for human rights? I think it's more about like the policies or like the strategies that you discussed. How can we develop it into a project or initiative to advance this?
So I saw the question. It's from Ghassan, right? So could you, Ghassan, perhaps, if you don't mind, I'll pick up on the answer. But if you don't mind, can you elaborate more on what you have in mind and the background, like what kind of NGO, etc. And then I'm happy to respond.
Ghassan, if you're speaking, we cannot hear you. Let me try. Can you try again, Ghassan? I can see you're unmuting, but you cannot hear you. Maybe if you want to write it in the text.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Sorry. Basically, it's a project with NGO named Lara. Like they've told me, no, they want this project to be feasible in Lebanon. They must have an idea, elaborate on an idea that promotes for human rights and advocates for human rights here in Lebanon, and it must be feasible. So maybe Kafala كفالة is one of the projects. هلا انه اكيد عملوا كذا NGO عليها projects to advocate to explain this problem, but we kind of must need a newer approach to try to solve this problem.
So certainly when we talk about project design, maybe here it's a bit of a tangent, but for a project to be successful, it has to be really to respond to a need. And here is the need is very clear that domestic workers do need a change in the situation, and kafala is a barrier to have the domestic workers in Lebanon, who are majority migrant workers, fulfill their rights. Now, how can we do something feasible? This is a big question, because again, when you're looking at kafala, you're looking at different levels. One level is the laws and regulation that require the willingness, the political will from the government and the parliament in order for the change to happen. So from this, we go to the second layer. What could create this political will if it's not there, right? So is kafala and right of migrant workers a priority today? Maybe not. How can we make it the priority? So this is how you zoom in to see where the NGOs can help. It's through advocacy, it's through awareness raising, it's to create some kind of, you're talking about like, let's look at it from a new perspective. So it's very important to conduct some kind of desk research to look at what has been done, what are the lessons learned, where can we go forward? So I don't think it's the place now to brainstorm over a project, but there are very clear elements to look into how can we motivate policymakers to really take on board changes towards kafala, and to position this NGO you're talking about into this landscape of different stakeholders, and to see what is their added value, what could they offer, right? And one thing is very important, whatever is done, is to make sure that migrant domestic workers are involved in the design, are involved in the delivery. It shouldn't be a proxy. It should be also driven by them, because they have built a lot of experience also on the ground. So I hope this answers a bit your question, and yeah.
Zeina, I think you have a similar question. I think you can elaborate on your answer. But Samantha is asking about what do you think about the funding system and consequently the NGOization of the struggle of migrant domestic workers? How do you think this is kind of contributing or maybe presenting a barrier to the activism or what we're trying to get to potentially?
Yeah, thank you. Allow me, just because there's another question, just to give me 1 second to read it, or if you want to read it out loud. Okay. Yeah. Well, certainly this is, again, I think this is the place with the colleague from Australia to discuss this issue, right? Like, to what extent can we have substantive change if it's only driven by NGOs? This is where there was the shift in Lebanon, where like during the war, we no longer had strong political parties that have the labor rights agenda integrated in their demands, and where human rights is also integrated in their not necessarily mandate, maybe we see it in the mandate, but on the ground. And what happened is it became kind of part of the NGOs' work. The problem with only relying on NGOs, and this is where trade unions are very important, and this is why pushing for migrant workers to organize within trade unions is very important, is because often the work of NGOs is linked to funding. If the funding is not there, sometimes the NGOs don't have the staff, they don't have the capacity to carry on a certain momentum, and they would have to shift into another area, which really creates kind of a disconnect from something that would require a lot of accumulation of experience, institutional memory, and it requires like a momentum to pick up so the change is achieved. So in a situation like Lebanon, this is where academia is important to link also to how are we shaping the young minds of our students? How are we really driving the evidence-based research to impact policies and to impact project design? Where is the space that is being created for NGOs to create kind of institutional memory and be open in sharing information and lessons learned? Because this is a struggle that really requires solidarity. And yeah, I really like the question. And I mean, unfortunately, maybe we don't have the solutions, but this is a kind of a question in the right direction, because it can also shape how we structure interventions and with who. It doesn't necessarily need to be something project related, and this is also something a bit risky. This is why I enjoy, for example, working with the ILO, because it has a structure where even if I leave, you have other people who would continue with their work that we have started, because it has the institutional approach to issues. And this is very important to keep in mind, how to invest energy with an institutional approach so it can be built on. I hope this answered the questions.
Thank you so much, Zeina. I think I'll revert back to Teresa and ask you, based on your experience, do you feel like when NGOs approach you as an alliance to try to work with you, do you feel like you're actively part of the process and you're co-creating the project and the needs have been assessed? Or do you think in most cases NGOs come and they tell you like, look, we have a project and we want to implement it? So to what extent do you feel like you're involved in the process of any project that you're part of?
Yeah, with the NGOs, international and local, they help us a lot as migrant domestic workers, and we are really involved in what project they're doing. And besides, we have also problems like other NGOs who's saying that we have lawyers, all this, and the cases that we're gonna help, and all this. Sometimes there is a hotline that we wanted an in case of emergency, that they couldn't help or be right there exactly in the right time. So in this case, in these cases, migrant workers doesn't we don't know ourselves what to do also, and how to cope with those cases and problems that we have. So we endorse with in the NGOs, and the NGOs has nothing to do also. So it's hard also in this with between the alliance or the other local organization, migrant organization, and the NGOs. And also, if ever they have their lawyers approaching them that they can help the case, I think I have dealt twice already that it didn't help. The case is just forget it, because it will take a time to solve the problem, or it may not solve the problem.
And Teresa, building on this answer, Samantha is asking, as a representative of the Alliance yourself, what do you think is missing, or what do you think can be done better by the organizations that support you?
I think they have to sit with us and discuss what really the main issues that the migrant domestic workers are facing, and then one by one to solve the problem. And really, we need an action when they offer something, a program or a training or something, that it will be in that training we learn ourselves also to deal with it or to do it as they trained us. But many trainings that I attended, that I didn't apply that because it's also doesn't work. So maybe we have to sit with them, discuss that, and to really talk directly what is really needed and necessary to do in order to work that out, whatever the project they have.
And I don't know if, Teresa, in general, you follow the news or you see the media, but if you do you think, what is the role of the media in highlighting the issue of the Kafala system? And do you think they do a good job at highlighting it, or do you think more talk, or that there should be more light shed on this issue?
In the media, they will say, and also showing our faces, as in my experience, when we say something regarding the migrant workers' rights, I have my experience that some of my colleagues were deported, and this keeps us like to be silent, but we will never be silent. We have to continue to raise our voices to raise awareness of the migrant domestic workers' rights. So this danger, even for the media, that they're saying they are also helping us. I'm not against them, because they are also raising awareness of the situation of the migrant domestic workers. They help us a lot too.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Zeina, would you like to add anything on that? Or
Yes, actually, it's hi, Amelie. Also, thank you for raising this question. It's very interesting that over the 10 years that I've been working on this issue, I interacted a lot with media, and to see how the narrative shifted, and how media persons who also attend training or read the material that is shared by, by us or by others regarding domestic migration issues, fair recruitment, what happens inside the households, etc., how slowly but surely started to have a different approach to narrating the stories of domestic workers. And if we go back, for example, and look at what happened during COVID, and where it was also intersecting with the financial crisis in Lebanon, there was a lot of empathy from the media towards the migrant workers who were left in the streets, who were left in front of their embassies. And this media buzz really created a lot of pressure. So there are some actions put in place. So the media can play a huge role because they are also kind of accessible to everyone, especially if we can see them, in diverse forms, not just in the newspapers, but also like on TV and radio shows. So actually, going back to the NGO question, a comprehensive media strategy, perhaps, and to have kind of a pilot project with media on these issues could be something very useful. And for that to be useful, it can, from the onset, capture the question that was raised here on the chat or the comment of Nadwa. Because Nadwa, I fully agree with you that all workers should be entitled to their rights. And when national workers do not have access to their rights, eventually it will affect migrant workers as well, right? So any media narrative has to also take into account the local context, the economic crisis, the financial crisis, the law enforcement situation in the country, because you don't want to create further kind of xenophobia or tension between migrant workers and nationals, because nationals themselves are deprived from their rights. So it's very important for the media to also see all that context. I will put in the chat, just also on the media, an interesting glossary that we have developed, where we go into friendly terms how we talk about migration issues, because sometimes the technical terms are maybe not accessible to the public. So we have produced a glossary, and we did training with media from different outlets globally on this glossary. And it was interesting to see also a shift on how they started to relate more to the vulnerabilities of the workers, or to understand more the migration process, recruitment practices, etc. I'll put it here on the link.
Thank you so much, Zeina. Zeina, I also have a question for you. In your presentation, you mentioned Innovation of Care Cooperative, and I felt like it was a very interesting initiative. And as you said, it's an alternative way of organizing, and it's such an empowering experience. So I wanted to ask you if you can elaborate a bit on this initiative, because I feel like at this point, the more we organize and the more we find innovative ways to organize, hopefully the better we are, or the closer we are to the goal. So if you can just share with us a bit about this cooperative, and how do they engage within this initiative?
Okay, it's a bit early days to talk about it in Lebanon, because we're conducting a research now to see within the legal framework of cooperatives in Lebanon, to what extent could migrant workers also form their own cooperatives? Because there's always often distinction between the rights of national workers and migrant workers. The very interesting part of the cooperative is that it's not like any other form of socially responsible company, where it just wants to promote rights and offer something to the community. The cooperative has to offer something to the members themselves, something tangible. Otherwise, it would not get the license to operate. So for the cooperative, when we think about cooperative for domestic workers, for example, it means it's a group of workers who, if they come together, they can, for instance, buy a small bus, and they can place workers and save on the transportation cost. Or it can, for example, if we're talking about, and a cooperative is very much disconnected from kafala. It's very much about providing services in different households. So they can, for example, buy their own PPEs, sometimes equipments that may not be available in households, or they can provide skills and training, which means it links to the skills recognition. Because when you look at care cooperative, you have also to understand the need of employers. Employers today, and many people here may relate to this. If you have an older person with Alzheimer, right, and the family members go to their work, who do they leave that person with at home? It's very expensive to have a professional nurse come and be a full-time there. At the same time, immigrant domestic workers who might be employed to do that job may not have the capacity to deal with an Alzheimer patient. Or the family themselves may not afford a full-time live-in person to be with them. And under kafala, this is the only way to have a migrant worker. So there is a need in Lebanon to have this flexible modalities of part-time work, but it should be decent work. So a part-time worker should not have a scarce situation where they don't know if tomorrow they have a job or not, where it's just by the hour. So the cooperative can really capture this need and offer a system. And why it's linked to organizing? Because the cooperative can also put the conditions based on which they will engage with the client or with a household. So so it's not just about providing the service, it's also provide the service that they consider decent, that they consider it empowering, and they provide a lot of elements for the workers to be ready to kind of change also and reduce the stigma that unfortunately affect domestic work. So just in brief, we are conducting this assessment now. Hopefully next month we are going to call for like a meeting to discuss it. And after that, we are preparing the ground to do a pilot test in 2 communities. But we are building on successful experiences elsewhere. So globally, the care cooperative is becoming kind of a trend. And those who are interested, I can also share with you links to look more into that. I hope that answered you.
Thank you so much, Zeina. Keep us in the loop because it seems like a very interesting initiative. And we also have an additional question to you and to also Teresa. Ever since you started working in this field, in the labor policies and the Kafala system field, what has been the most significant achievement that has occurred, in your opinion? Zeina, you can go ahead, or maybe Teresa, whichever you prefer.
I don't know if I can claim this, but I think Teresa and the Alliance and the way migrant domestic workers managed to organize despite all the challenges. I really think this is a very humbling and motivating experience. Just to give a background context, and this is how I met Teresa in 2012. It's when I joined the ILO. So recognizing the challenges of domestic workers, migrant domestic workers to organize, we initiated a participatory action research. And in this participatory action research, community leaders from different nationalities were identified by us, by my team. And we trained the community leaders on research ethics, on facilitation skills, and on mobilization skills. And every community leader was responsible to recruit 5 community members to join training sessions. And every one of those 5 were also trained on mobilization skills and encouraged to recruit 5 others. When we were ready, we had training over a period of like 4 months. Every weekend, migrant workers were super committed then. So we would we would divide them at the beginning into focus group based on nationalities, because there were a lot of separation between nationalities. So every nationality would go through questions and discussions facilitated by the migrant domestic workers, the community leaders who were trained. And something about their experience in migration, about what they face in Lebanon, their aspirations, etc. And then after every focus group finishes, we go back to the plenary and they share their stories and they share what happened in the focus group. And this is where the migrant worker community realized that they share something in common, which is domestic workers are not protected. There's a stigma around domestic work. There's a very difficult recruitment and migration structure. And we introduced the idea of organizing, which is one of the fundamental principles and rights at the ILO. And it's one key international standard that direct the work of the ILO, the right to organize and collective bargaining. They also realized that they are all outside the labor law. And slowly but surely, they formed a committee. And we invested time and creativity with the migrant worker community to look at what is their needs, and did training for them on organizing events, on communication, on advocacy, etc. And then they flew solo. And this is the beauty of it. This is where you see, you have the Alliance, you have Enyalenya, you have Misawat, you have the Domestic Workers Union, you have different groups that at one point they were together under the Domestic Workers Union, and then for a reason or another, they felt that they can organize themselves outside of that. But all of them are still one voice, as in demanding the dismantling of kafala and providing support to each other. So yeah, this is something for me, I feel it's very inspiring and very humbling how despite all the challenges that they face, they have the resilience to do this advocacy and activist work.
Definitely, I completely agree with you. Teresa, would you like to share with us what do you think is the most significant achievement that you have done maybe as an alliance so far?
Yeah, I want to thank Zeina because I met, as she mentioned, everything, how we met. And I think she already said everything well. And yeah, I'm very thankful for ILO. And this is where how I was able to travel to attend in Italy the decent work for domestic workers because of them also. And their training was really helpful for the migrant workers and be able to communicate with other nationalities that we don't even dream of being with another nationalities. Now that we are as an alliance, a diverse nationality, we know how to communicate each other and how we build our solidarity. And I want to thank the ILO and Zeina and all her colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think if there are no other questions or comments, if Zeina or Teresa, do you have any closing remarks moving forward? Go ahead. Or if we've covered everything, then maybe you can call it a day.
I think if you invite me to speak, I can't speak till tomorrow. So I'm not gonna do it because this is
Go
really
ahead, Zeina.
this is something that require a lot of again collective thinking. But thank you for the opportunity, and yeah, we're always here to also provide more support, more technical information if needed. And thank you for all those who made the time. And Teresa, again, thank you for remaining this active voice, and good luck going forward.
Thank you, Zeina.
Thank you,
Teresa,
Zeina.
do you have any closing remarks, anything to add?
Oh, the Alliance of Migrant Workers are always open for training and whatever the ILO will offer to help us. We are always open for them. Thank you, Zeina. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you so much, Zeina and Teresa, for your time. And I would like to thank all of the attendees for making it. And stay tuned for the rest of the webinar series. You can find it on our Instagram, and I can also share the link. You can register, and hopefully we'll get to see you next time. The next webinar is on February 19. So hopefully we'll see you there. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye. Thank you.